The Echoes of Larkspur, Redemption in Dark Waters. Part 1. The Innocence, the Envy, and the Prophetic Dream. In Larkspur, a picturesque town with ivy-clad homes and cobblestone pathways, children's laughter often echoed through the streets, playing freely without a care. Among these gleeful young souls was Eli, an 8-year-old boy who was beloved for his striking blue eyes and spirited heart. Whether it was chasing after butterflies or playing imaginative games with his friends, his joy was infectious, and he became the darling of the town. However, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. At the periphery of the town square, Mrs. Blackwell watched, her eyes an abyss of envy and grief. Years of yearning for a child had left her bereft, turning her once vibrant spirit to one filled with melancholy. The sight of Eli, so full of life and promise, brought forth a pang of longing so intense that she whispered an arcane chant under her breath, seeking to claim a fragment of his joy for herself. As the incantation left her lips, Eli suddenly stopped playing. His laughter ceased, and a faraway look settled in his eyes. The abrupt change in his demeanor sent murmurs through the crowd, but none could decipher the cause of his sudden transformation. That night, next door to Eli's house, the town's oldest and wisest resident, Old Man Hawthorne, had a vivid dream. In it, he saw Eli standing at the edge of a dark forest, his once bright blue eyes now clouded. A whispering voice in the dream warned Hawthorne that a curse had been cast, and that Eli's spirit was trapped in a realm of shadows. To save the boy, water in which the cursor had bathed would be needed to cleanse him. Awakening in a cold sweat, Old Man Hawthorne immediately recognized the weight of his vision. He hurried to Eli's home, recounting the dream to his worried parents. The task seemed daunting, but the hope it offered was invaluable. As dawn broke, the town's atmosphere was tense. Mrs. Blackwell's actions had unwittingly set into motion events that would intertwine the fates of many. The search for a cure had begun. Part 2. The curse's effects and the desperate search. The days following saw a drastic transformation in Eli. His once lively sketches became nightmarish illustrations, often featuring a looming shadow with piercing eyes. His joyous songs were replaced with incoherent murmurs, and he began to distance himself from his friends. The most chilling change was his aversion to water. Even a drop would send him into inexplicable bouts of panic. The townspeople whispered among themselves, many with pity, others with superstitious fear. They spoke in hushed tones about the evil eye and its powerful influence, recalling stories of past victims who never returned to their former selves. Determined to find a cure, Eli's parents, guided by Old Man Hawthorne's dream, approached the town council to devise a plan. The council was skeptical at first, but the urgency in the old man's voice and the tangible evidence of Eli's transformation convinced them. They agreed that the water in which Mrs. Blackwell had bathed was essential for Eli's salvation. A small group, led by Eli's father and Old Man Hawthorne, ventured to Mrs. Blackwell's residence. Her home, a dilapidated mansion overshadowed by thick canopies, looked more forbidding than ever. The team hesitated for a moment, but then mustered the courage to knock. After what seemed like an eternity, the door creaked open to reveal Mrs. Blackwell, her face a mix of surprise and dread. Without preamble, Hawthorne described his dream, emphasizing the need for the water. Mrs. Blackwell, already consumed by guilt over her impulsive act, hesitated only briefly before leading them to her private bath chamber. There, in an ornate bathtub, lay the water shimmering mysteriously under the dim light. With great care, they collected the water in a glass vial. But as Eli's father held it up, he noticed an unsettling detail. The liquid had an unnatural dark hue, akin to ink, and seemed to have a life of its own, moving restlessly within its confines. The quest had taken an ominous turn, but with the potential solution in hand, the group hurried back, hoping the dark waters held the key to Ellie's freedom. After obtaining the water, the group gathered in Mrs. Blackwell's living room, the air thick with tension. Old Man Hawthorne took a deep breath, and with a grave expression, he explained the specifics of his dream. To lift the curse, he began, Eli must bathe in this water. Not just a sprinkle or a touch, he must submerge himself completely, letting the water envelop him. Eli's parents exchanged worried glances. Given Ella's newfound terror of water, this would be no easy feat. The task ahead was clear, but the challenges it presented were daunting. The weight of the situation bore down on them. They had the potential remedy, but administering it would test their courage and resolve. Part 3. The Ritual and Redemption. Back at Eli's home, preparations began. The tub was filled with lukewarm water, and the dark water from the vial was to be mixed in. Given Eli's recent aversion to water, his parents worried about how they would manage to get him to bathe in it. But there was a palpable determination in the air, a collective will to restore Eli's spirit. When the moment came, Eli's mother, with tears in her eyes, gently cradled her son, trying to soothe his rising panic as they approached the tub. With a deep breath, his father gently poured the dark water into the tub, its inky tendrils swirling mysteriously before merging with the bathwater. The room felt colder, the very atmosphere thick with anticipation. Eli, sensing the urgency, seemed to draw from an inner reservoir of strength. His gaze fixed on the water, he hesitated only momentarily before allowing his father to gently lower him in. As the dark water enveloped him, a gasp echoed through the room. The water began to bubble and steam, and a hushed whisper filled the room, the same incantation Mrs. Blackwell had muttered. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually the water stilled, returning to its clear state. Eli emerged, his blue eyes once again vibrant, his spirit rejuvenated. The room erupted in relieved cheers, the tension melting away into tears of joy. Mrs. Blackwell, having been summoned to witness the ritual, stood at the doorway. Remorse was evident in her eyes. Approaching Eli, she knelt down, whispering an apology, a plea for forgiveness. Eli, with the wisdom and grace that delight his years, took her hand and nodded, symbolizing not just his forgiveness, but the town's as well. In the days that followed, Larkspur transformed. Where once stood division and suspicion, now stood unity and understanding. Eli and Mrs. Blackwell forged an unexpected bond, her home frequently filled with his laughter and their shared tales. The town learned that from the darkest moments can spring the most profound connections, a testament to the enduring spirit of community and the power of redemption.